Greetings, Lore Masters. Tonight our chronicle covers one of the most contentious, heated and frankly disturbing realizations in the history of the Fourth Era. We are returning to the snow-swept province of Skyrim, but not to slay dragons or loot ancient Nord tombs. Instead, we are pulling at a loose thread, a single, terrifying thread that threatens to unravel the entire justification for the Stormcloak rebellion. We are investigating the Bear of Markarth himself, Jarl Ulfric Stormcloak, and the evidence that suggests he isn't the saviour of the Nords, but a puppet dancing on strings held by the high elves of the Aldmeri Dominion. Imagine standing on the precipice of a freezing cliff in Arngeir, the biting wind whipping through your armour, looking down at the foreboding stone architecture of the Thalmor Embassy. Inside, the wine is flowing, the fire is warm, and the political elite are trading barbs wrapped in silk. But in the shadows, a truth is hiding that changes the fate of the Empire. Let's be honest, most of us probably wouldn't survive a stealth mission into the heart of Thalmor territory without spamming quick save or relying on a glitched bucket to phase through a wall. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and what time it is in your corner of Nirn. I always love seeing the map fill up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins with a mission that every Dragonborn knows well, yet few stop to fully analyse in the heat of the moment. The quest is diplomatic immunity. It is the moment the main storyline shifts from high fantasy dragon slaying to a gritty, noir-style espionage thriller. Delphine, the acting Grandmaster of the Dying Blades, has a hunch. She suspects the Thalmor are the ones bringing the dragons back to life to wipe out humanity. She's wrong about the dragons, of course. Alduin doesn't take orders from elves, but her paranoia leads us to a discovery far more valuable than the origin of the dragon crisis. It leads us to the dossier. To understand the weight of this first clue, we have to immerse ourselves in the atmosphere of the infiltration. You hand your gear over to Malbon, a wood elf who looks like he's about 2 seconds away from a nervous breakdown. Seriously, the man is sweating buckets in a climate where sweat should freeze instantly. You don the party clothes, which, let's be real, offer absolutely zero protection and barely enough style to justify the risk. You enter the embassy, rubbing shoulders with the very people oppressing the province. Elenwen, the first emissary, greets you with that thinly veiled condescension the Altmer have perfected over thousands of years. She is the spider in the centre of this web, and tonight we are breaking into her private sanctum. The party is a distraction. While a drunken noble makes a scene, usually thanks to your prodding, you slip away into the kitchens, retrieve your gear, and begin the bloody work of clearing the guards. The transition is jarring. One moment, you are listening to the polite clinking of silverware. The next, you are stalking through cold stone corridors, smelling the ozone of lightning spells and the metallic tang of blood. The Thalmor wizards are patrolling, their dialogue filled with disdain for everything human. You fight your way out of the embassy proper and into the courtyard, the freezing air hitting your face before entering Elenwen's solar. This is the heart of the beast. This is where the Dominion keeps its secrets. It's a distinct building separate from the festivities, quiet and imposing. Inside there is a chest. It's not a particularly special chest. It looks like any other container you've looted 1,000 times for 3 gold coins and a minor potion of stamina. But inside this chest lies a book titled simply Thalmor Dossier, Ulfric Stormcloak. This is our smoking gun. This is the first and most critical piece of evidence. When you open those pages, the very first header hits you like a warhammer to the chest. Status, Asset, Uncooperative, Dormant. Let those words sink in. Asset. In the world of intelligence and espionage, words matter. They are chosen with surgical precision. The Thalmor do not use the word asset lightly. If Ulfric were merely a nuisance, he would be labelled a target or a threat. If he were a chaotic element they were simply watching, he might be labelled a person of interest. But asset implies ownership. It implies utility. It implies that Ulfric Stormcloak, the man whose entire identity is built on hatred of the elves and the preservation of Talos worship, is viewed by his enemies as a tool in their inventory. This revelation completely recontextualizes the Civil War. For players experiencing this for the first time, it's often a moment of denial. Surely there must be a mistake. Ulfric is the one shouting, "Skyrim belongs to the Nords." He's the one executing Imperial loyalists for bowing to the White Gold Concordat. How can he be an asset to the very people he claims to want to destroy? The dossier continues, and while we will dissect the specific timeline of his conditioning later, the mere existence of this file in Elenwen's personal chest suggests that the Thalmor are not afraid of Ulfric's rebellion. They are banking on it. The text explicitly states that the so-called Markarth Incident was particularly valuable to their strategic goals. We'll get there, but for now, focus on the psychological impact of finding this document. You are standing in the office of the most powerful Thalmor agent in Skyrim, and she has a file on the leader of the rebellion that reads like a performance review for a difficult employee, rather than a report on a sworn enemy. There is a fascinating bit of obscure lore regarding the location itself that adds a layer of irony to this discovery. The Thalmor Embassy wasn't always the headquarters of the Dominion in Skyrim. It sits high in the mountains of Harfingar overlooking the Sea of Ghosts. Before the Great War and the subsequent humiliating treaty, this building was a retreat for the local nobility, a place of Nord heritage. The fact that the Empire was forced to hand over this specific, defensible and beautiful location to the elves is a subtle but constant reminder of their submission. Finding the proof of Ulfric's manipulation here, in a building stolen from the Nords, adds a bitter poetic justice to the narrative. It's as if the land itself is trying to tell you the truth. Now we have to address the community debate here, because it's fierce. Fans have been arguing about the definition of uncooperative for over a decade. One camp believes that uncooperative absolves Ulfric of guilt. They argue that because he is uncooperative, he is no longer under their control, and is therefore a true hero who broke free. They view the asset tag as a relic of the past, something the Thalmor wish they still had but lost. However, the counter-argument, and the one the text supports more heavily, is that uncooperative simply means he isn't taking direct orders right now. An uncooperative asset is still an asset. A wild dog that bites everyone is still useful if you release it into your neighbour's sheep pen. You don't need to control the dog, you just need to ensure it keeps biting the sheep. The Thalmor don't need Ulfric to report in every Tuesday for a staff meeting. They just need him to keep fighting the Empire. As long as he drains Imperial resources and keeps the legions occupied in the north, he is fulfilling his function as an asset perfectly. The dossier is written in a dry, bureaucratic tone that makes it all the more chilling. There is no emotional language, no gloating villainy. It is a status report. It lists his capture, his interrogation, and his release. It mentions that direct contact has been established in the past, a bombshell we will explore deeply soon, and that he has proven his value. As you stand in that solar, listening for the footsteps of guards, you realise the magnitude of the lie. The Stormcloak soldiers dying in the mud, freezing in their camps, believing they are fighting for religious freedom, are actually dying to further the goals of the Aldmeri Dominion. They are bleeding the Empire dry so that when the next Great War comes, and it is coming, the Empire will be too weak to resist the High Elves. Ulfric is the blade the Thalmor are using to cut the Empire's throat, and the tragic part is, he might not even fully realise how deep the manipulation goes. The discovery of the dossier is the red pill moment of Skyrim. Once you read it, you can't unread it. You can't look at the Windhelm throne room the same way again. When you hear Ulfric give his rousing speeches about blood and honour, you don't hear a patriot anymore. You hear the echoes of a Thalmor interrogation room. You see the invisible strings attached to his limbs. And speaking of strings, we need to talk about the physical reality of this intel. It's not just words on a page. The fact that Elenwen keeps this file so close, in her private quarters, rather than in a general archive, suggests that this is an active operation. This isn't cold storage. This is a file that is likely updated regularly. She is watching him. She rode to Helgen to save him, another point we will unravel, and she monitors his progress in the war with keen interest. The dossier warns against a Stormcloak victory, yes, but it also warns against an Imperial victory. The goal is the conflict itself. So, we pocket the dossier, we grab the Dragon investigation report too, just to keep Delphine happy, and we make our escape. Maybe you fight your way out through the dungeon, freeing a prisoner or two, or maybe you sneak out the back. But as you emerge into the Skyrim night, the cold air feels different. The Aurora Borealis dancing overhead doesn't look like the spirits of ancestors anymore. It looks like the magical energies of a world being torn apart by deception. You have the first clue. The leader of the rebellion is a dormant, uncooperative asset of the enemy. But how did this happen? How did the son of the Bear of Eastmarch, a hero of the Great War, fall so low? To understand the asset, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to go back to the fires of the Great War in the White Gold Tower, where a young Ulfric Stormcloak learned the true meaning of pain. To understand how a Nord hero becomes a pawn, we have to rewind the clock. We must leave the foggy cliffs of Skyrim and travel south, back to the heart of the Empire, and back in time to the darkest days of the Great War. The year is 4E 174. The Aldmeri Dominion has swarmed across Cyrodiil like a plague of golden locusts. The Imperial City, the jewel of Tamriel, is under siege. It is here, amidst the smoke and the screaming, that the file on Ulfric Stormcloak truly begins. The dossier tells us explicitly that Ulfric was captured during the campaign for the White Gold Tower. At this time, he wasn't the grisly, middle-aged Jarl sitting on the throne of Windhelm. He was a young man, full of fire and the Thuum. Remember, Ulfric had been chosen by the Greybeards to study the way of the voice, a rare honour. He was on the path to becoming a monk, a pacifist meditating on the nature of the sky. But when the Great War broke out, he couldn't sit idly by on the throat of the world while his people bled. He abandoned his training, a decision that likely haunts Arngeir to this day, and marched to war. There is a tragic nobility in that choice. He traded a life of silence for the cacophony of battle. But war is rarely kind to idealists, and the Dominion forces were not the disorganised bandit clans he might have faced in Skyrim. They were a disciplined, magical war machine. During the chaotic defence of the Imperial City, Ulfric was taken alive. This is a crucial detail. In the heat of medieval-style combat, taking high-ranking prisoners is often more trouble than it's worth, unless they have specific value. The Thalmor, with their network of spies, likely knew exactly who he was. The son of the Jarl of Eastmarch, a potential future leader, and a wielder of the voice. He was a prize. He was dragged to the dungeons. Now, if you've played the Elder Scrolls or Oblivion, you know the layout of the Imperial City. You know the damp, oppressive atmosphere of the Imperial prisons. But under Thalmor occupation, the White Gold Tower itself became a house of horrors. The elves, particularly the Thalmor justiciars, are masters of magic, and that extends to the arcane arts of interrogation. They don't just break bones, they break minds. They use illusion magic to distort reality, restoration magic to keep victims alive longer than nature intended, and destruction magic to inflict calculated pain. It was here that Ulfric met his handler, and this is where the lore gets uncomfortably personal. The dossier in the embassy is signed and maintained by Elenwen. While she's now the first emissary basking in diplomatic immunity, back then she was an interrogator. She was the one overseeing his conditioning. Imagine the dynamic: a young, proud Nord, screaming defiance, and the cool, calculated Altmer mage peeling away his defences layer by layer. This establishes a psychological link between them that persists decades later. When Ulfric sees Elenwen at the negotiations in High Hrothgar, he isn't just looking at a political enemy, he is looking at his torturer. The breaking of Ulfric Stormcloak relies on a specific, devastating lie. This is the core in-game fact that the dossier reveals, yet it's buried so deep in the text that many players skim right over it. The text states, he was made to believe information obtained during his interrogation was crucial in the capture of the Imperial City. The city had in fact fallen before he broke. This is the masterstroke of Thalmor cruelty. They tortured him until he finally cracked, as almost everyone eventually does. He gave up information. Maybe it was defensive positions, maybe it was supply routes. To a soldier, giving up intel is the ultimate failure. But the Thalmor twisted the knife. They told him that his specific confession was the key that unlocked the city gates. They made him believe that the burning of the Imperial City, the sacking of the White Gold Tower, and the slaughter of the legions were his fault. In reality, the city had already fallen. The information he gave was useless, outdated, or irrelevant. The battle was over before he even opened his mouth. But they never told him that. They let him live with the guilt. They cultivated it. They watered the seeds of his self-hatred so that it would grow into a desperate need for redemption. A man who believes he betrayed the Empire might eventually decide that the Empire isn't worth saving, or that he needs to build something new to wash away his sins. This guilt is the engine of the Stormcloak rebellion. Ulfric isn't just fighting for Talos. He's fighting to prove to himself that he isn't a traitor, even though the origin of his rebellion is rooted in that very trauma. Now, let's touch on an obscure lore tidbit regarding the White Gold Tower itself during this time. There are accounts suggesting that during the occupation, the Thalmor committed atrocities within the tower designed to desecrate it as a symbol of human rule. The culling of the Moth Priests is one such event where the keepers of the Elder Scrolls were hunted down or dispersed. For a religiously minded Nord like Ulfric, witnessing the systematic dismantling of human history and the humiliation of the Empire's Sacred Heart would have been shattering. It wasn't just physical torture, it was a front-row seat to the apocalypse of his culture. He watched the Empire fail, he watched the legions crumble, and in the dark, whispered into his ear by Elenwen, was the constant refrain. This is your fault. The Empire is weak. Only you can save your people. This leads us to a fascinating area of community debate. There is a persistent theory among lore enthusiasts that Ulfric may have been subjected to magical conditioning similar to a Geas, or a deep-seated illusion spell that makes him susceptible to Thalmor triggers. Some fans point to the way he freezes or reacts during specific interactions, or the sheer irrationality of his timing in starting the war as evidence of magical compulsion. However, the more grounded, and perhaps more tragic interpretation, is that magic wasn't necessary. Trauma is a powerful enough spell on its own. The Thalmor didn't need to mind control him with a spell. They just needed to break his spirit and then reshape it. They utilised a technique known in modern psychology as learned helplessness, combined with positive reinforcement when he aligned with their views. By the time they released him, and yes, they let him go, he was a loaded weapon pointed directly at the Empire. Why release him? Why let a valuable prisoner, a user of the voice, walk free? Because a broken Ulfric was more dangerous to the Empire than a dead Ulfric. If they killed him, he's just another casualty of the Great War, mourned by his father in Windhelm and then forgotten. But alive, he's a walking testament to the Empire's failure. He returns to Skyrim carrying the trauma of the war, the secret guilt of his betrayal, and a burning hatred for the Dominion that, paradoxically, makes him do exactly what the Dominion wants. The dossier mentions that after the war, contact was established. He was allowed to escape. This is a classic intelligence trope, the escaped prisoner who actually had the door unlocked for them. He returns to Skyrim, not as a coward, but as a survivor, a hero, the only man who knows the true face of the enemy. The people of Eastmarch welcome him back with open arms, unaware that the man who returned is not the same boy who left for High Hrothgar. The boy who left wanted to shout at the sky in worship. The man who returned wants to shout the world apart. It is haunting to imagine Ulfric's journey home from Cyrodiil, trudging north through the devastated landscape, passing the retreating Imperial legions who just signed the humiliation of the White Gold Concordat. He sees the Empire bowing to the elves who tortured him. He sees the ban on Talos, the god of his ancestors, being signed into law by the Emperor he fought for. In his mind, the logic begins to twist. I broke under torture because the Empire was weak. The Empire surrendered because it is weak. If I am to redeem myself, I must be strong. I must reject the weak Empire. I must restore Talos. The Thalmor planted these seeds, but Ulfric watered them with his own grief. The tragedy is that his hatred of the Thalmor is genuine. He despises them with every fibre of his being. He isn't a willing collaborator in the sense of a paid spy. He isn't cashing checks from the Aldmeri Dominion. He is an uncooperative asset precisely because he hates them so much. His hatred makes him predictable. His hatred makes him irrational. And his hatred blinds him to the fact that every Imperial soldier he kills brings the Dominion one step closer to total victory. He left the White Gold Tower a free man, physically, but mentally he never left that interrogation chair. He is still, strapped in, screaming, desperate to prove he didn't betray the world, while Elenwen stands in the shadows smiling, watching her asset march north to burn Skyrim to the ground. And as he returned to his father's court in Windhelm, the Thalmor watched and waited. They knew he needed a spark. They knew that a dormant asset is useless unless activated. They needed an event that would turn his simmering resentment into open rebellion. They needed an incident, and as fate would have it, the Reachmen of Markarth were about to provide the perfect opportunity. The spark that the Thalmor were waiting for ignited in the rocky vertical canyons of the Reach. If you've ever traversed the western edge of Skyrim, you know the terrain. It is a jagged scar on the map, a place of verticality and stone where the mist clings to the ancient Dwemer towers of Markarth like a shroud. It was here, in the year 4E176, just 2 years after the end of the Great War, that the asset moved from dormant to active, and the Markarth Incident set the stage for the bleeding of Skyrim. To understand the manipulation here, we have to look at the political landscape of the time. The Empire was exhausted. The legions had been decimated in the fight to retake the Imperial city. Consequently, the garrisons in Skyrim were skeleton crews. Sensing this weakness, the native Reachmen, the people we now know as the Forsworn, seized Markarth. They drove out the Nords and established an independent kingdom. Now, here is a detail that often gets lost in the Nord-centric history books. The Reachmen actually governed Markarth fairly well. For 2 years, they sought recognition from the Empire as a legitimate kingdom. They weren't just madmen in fur armour back then, they were a sovereign people reclaiming their land. But to the Nord Jarl Hrolfdir, the father of the current Jarl Igmund, this was an intolerable occupation. He was a Jarl without a city, a ruler living in exile. Desperate, humiliated, and unable to get help from the shattered Imperial Legion, he turned to the only private army available, the militia of Ulfric Stormcloak. This is where the strings begin to pull. Ulfric agreed to retake the Reach, but he demanded a price. It wasn't gold, and it wasn't land. He demanded that Hrolfdir allow the free worship of Talos in Markarth once the city was liberated. On the surface, this looks like the act of a pious man, a crusader for his faith, but looking at it through the lens of the Thalmor Dossier, it looks suspiciously like a trap designed to force the Empire's hand. Remember, at this point in history, the White Gold Concordat had been signed, banning Talos worship. However, and this is the critical nuance, the Empire wasn't enforcing it. The Emperor knew the ban was unpopular, so the legions turned a blind eye. People still wore their amulets, they just tucked them inside their shirts. There were no Thalmor death squads roaming the roads of Skyrim yet. The ban was a piece of paper in a drawer in Cyrodiil. Ulfric's demand changed everything. He forced the issue into the public spotlight. He made it impossible for the Empire to look away. When Ulfric and his men descended on Markarth, it was a slaughter. He utilised the Thu'um shouting the Reachmen from the high walls. The voice, a sacred art meant for worship, was used to tear men apart. He retook the city with a brutality that became legendary. The Bear of Markarth, a book you can find on dusty shelves throughout the game, describes the aftermath: executions, torture, and the indiscriminate killing of anyone who hadn't fought with him. While the author of that book has an imperial bias, the sheer volume of Forsworn who exist today, driven by a generational hatred of Nords, suggests the atrocity was very real. Once the city was secured, the Imperial Legion arrived to re-establish order. But Ulfric closed the gates. He stood on the ramparts, blood on his hands, and refused to let the Empire in until they officially agreed to his terms: free Talos worship in Markarth. The Imperial commander was stuck. The Reach was a vital strategic region with silver mines the Empire desperately needed to pay its war debts. He couldn't afford a siege against a Nord hero. So, he caved. He agreed to the terms. Ulfric opened the gates, the Empire marched in, and for a brief moment, Talos worship was legal in Markarth. And then, like clockwork, the Thalmor arrived. This is the core in-game fact that players often overlook during dialogue with Jarl Igmund. The Thalmor didn't find out later. They were practically waiting in the wings. The speed with which the Dominion responded to the treaty violation in Markarth is suspicious, to say the least. It implies they were watching, or perhaps, that they had nudged Ulfric toward this specific demand. The dossier notes that the Markarth Incident was particularly valuable. Why? Because it gave the Dominion the legal justification they needed to invade Skyrim's sovereign structure. Before Markarth, the Thalmor had no right to send justiciars into Skyrim to arrest people. The treaty only allowed for the ban. It didn't grant the Dominion police powers within Imperial provinces unless the Empire failed to enforce the treaty itself. By forcing the Empire to publicly break the treaty in Markarth, Ulfric gave the Thalmor the breach of contract clause they needed. They pointed a finger at the Emperor and said, "You cannot control your own people. You're allowing heretics to worship openly. Therefore, we must intervene." The Emperor, terrified of starting another war he knew he couldn't win, had to capitulate. He was forced to allow the Thalmor Justiciars, the roaming execution squads we all hate, to enter Skyrim to enforce the ban personally. And who was the first person they arrested? Ulfric Stormcloak. It was a masterstroke of geopolitical manoeuvring. By demanding religious freedom, Ulfric single-handedly destroyed the unofficial religious freedom everyone was already enjoying. He turned a don't ask, don't tell situation into an active inquisition. There is an obscure lore tidbit here regarding the dialogue of the Thalmor Justiciars themselves. If you listen closely to their radiant dialogue, or read the prisoner transfer orders, they often refer to the Markarth breach as the founding moment of their operations in Skyrim. Before that date, there is almost no record of Thalmor kidnapping patrols in the province. The horrors of Northwatch Keep, the screams in the night, the disappearances of Thorald Greymane and others, all of that misery can be traced back to the moment Ulfric demanded the Empire sign a piece of paper he knew they couldn't honour. This brings us to a significant community debate. Did Ulfric know? Was he simply a politically naive soldier who didn't understand the diplomatic consequences of his actions? Or was he, in his broken post-torture state, subconsciously seeking a confrontation? Some fans argue that Ulfric is simply stupid, a brute with a hammer who sees every problem as a nail. Others argue that he knew exactly what would happen. He knew the Thalmor would come, and he wanted them to come. He wanted to radicalise the population. He knew that peaceful coexistence with the ban was impossible for his long-term goals. He needed martyrs. He needed the Nords to see elves dragging their neighbours out of their homes. If the Thalmor goal was to destabilise the region, Ulfric was their MVP. The asset status in the dossier likely solidified right here. They saw a man who could be manipulated into creating chaos in the name of order. They arrested him, yes, but notice what happened next. He wasn't executed for treason. He wasn't shipped to the Somerset Isles to disappear into a magical prison. He was eventually released again to mourn his father and take the throne of Windhelm. Why release the man who just embarrassed the Dominion and the Empire? Because the Thalmor realised that Ulfric in a cell is a martyr, but Ulfric on a throne is a catalyst for civil war. They needed him back in Eastmarch, stewing in his anger, rallying the other Jarls. They had successfully utilised the Markarth Incident to insert their own agents into Skyrim, and now they needed their asset to continue the work of dividing the province. The tragedy of Markarth is twofold. First, it created the Forsworn, a forever war in the hills that kills hundreds of innocents every year. Second, it opened the door for Elenwen and her agents to walk right into solitude and set up shop. As you walk the stone streets of Markarth today, looking at the waterfalls and the imposing Dwemer bronze, remember that this city was the trap. It was the bait. Ulfric bit down hard, believing he was restoring the honour of Talos. Instead, he was signing the warrant for every Talos worshipper who would be dragged away in the night for the next 20 years. He thought he was proving the Empire's weakness, but he was actually proving the Dominion's intelligence. The dossier confirms that this period of direct contact and subsequent non-interference was critical. They learned his buttons. They learned that if you threaten his pride or his god, he will react with disproportionate force, regardless of the strategic cost. And they filed that information away for the next phase of the plan, the rebellion itself. But between the bloodbath of Markarth and the death of High King Torygg, there is a gap in the timeline. A quiet period. A time when the asset was listed as dormant yet cooperative. We need to investigate this shadowed era, because the dossier hints at something even darker than manipulation. It hints at communication. What happened in the years when Ulfric sat in Windhelm brooding on his throne? Did the letters stop coming, or did the nature of the relationship simply change? After the chaos of Markarth settled, a deceptive quiet fell over Eastmarch. Ulfric returned to the Palace of the Kings, the ancient seat of power in Windhelm. The stone walls of that city are thick, built to withstand the howling winds of the Sea of Ghosts, but they could not keep out the whispers. The dossier in the Thalmor Embassy refers to this period in a way that should make every true son and daughter of Skyrim shudder. It marks a phase where the asset was considered dormant, yet the relationship was cooperative. We need to unpack that word, cooperative. In the context of intelligence, cooperative implies a two-way street. It doesn't necessarily mean Ulfric was taking orders like a soldier, but it suggests a channel was open. It suggests dialogue. This is the period after his release from the second arrest following the Markarth Incident, but before he marched to Solitude to challenge High King Torygg. This is the era where the Stormcloak rebellion was being born in the mind of a grieving son. Imagine the scene in the Palace of the Kings. Ulfric's father, the Great Bear of Eastmarch, passes away. Ulfric ascends to the throne. He is now a Jarl. He has legitimacy. He has power. And in the shadows of his court, unseen by the common soldier, the Thalmor were likely still whispering. The dossier states, direct contact was established, and he has proven his value as an asset. This is the most damning implication of the entire file. It suggests that at some point Ulfric knew he was dealing with them. During the Markarth Incident, one could argue he was a pawn being played from a distance. But direct contact implies face-to-face meetings or direct correspondence. Did Elenwen send envoys to Windhelm under the guise of diplomacy? Did she send secret missives reminding him of their time in the interrogation room? The dormant status during this period is key. It means he wasn't fighting the Empire yet. He was building his strength. He was gathering his huskarls. He was radicalizing the population of Windhelm. The Grey Quarter was becoming a ghetto for the Dunmer refugees, stoking the fires of Nord nationalism. The Argonians were pushed to the docks. Ulfric was creating an us versus them narrative that would serve as the fuel for his war. And the Thalmor? They did. Nothing. This is the core in-game fact that screams for attention. The Thalmor presence in Eastmarch is virtually non-existent during the game compared to Harfengar or the Reach. Why? Because they didn't need to interfere. Ulfric was doing their work for them. He was segregating his city, alienating potential allies, and preparing to fracture the province. If the Thalmor had wanted to stop the rebellion before it started, they could have assassinated Ulfric a dozen times over during this dormant phase. A single Nightblade in the snowy streets of Windhelm could have ended the threat. But they let him live. They let him brood. They protected their investment. There is an obscure lore tidbit found in the cut content of the game that sheds light on this. Original dialogue files for Ulfric suggest a much deeper, more melancholic awareness of his position. In some scrapped lines, he alludes to the burden of dark secrets and the price of leadership being heavier than his axe. While not canon in the final release, these remnants of the writing process hint that the developers toyed with the idea of Ulfric being more explicitly aware of his compromised nature. He's a man who knows he has damaged goods, perhaps even sensing the strings, but feeling powerless to cut them because the only path he sees forward is the one he's already on. This period of cooperation leads to a massive community debate regarding the nature of the contact. Apologists for Ulfric argue that contact could simply mean interrogation or coerced negotiation. They argue he never willingly agreed to anything. But the counter-argument is the timing. If the contact happened after the Great War and during his rise to power, it implies a negotiation. You want to free Skyrim? We can help you by staying out of your way. The Thalmor strategy here relies on the concept of controlled opposition. By allowing Ulfric to exist, they created a magnet for all the anti-Dominion sentiment in Skyrim. Instead of having thousands of angry Nords forming independent terror cells or resistance groups that would be hard to track, the Thalmor got them all to wear the same blue uniform and gather in the same forts. Ulfric inadvertently organised the resistance into a neat targetable army that the Dominion could monitor and manage. He was the Pied Piper, leading the most dangerous warriors of Skyrim into a grinder of his own making. Think about the sheer geography of his rebellion. He consolidated his power in the east, leaving the west to the Empire. He split the country perfectly down the middle. This wasn't a messy insurgency. It was a clean civil war, exactly the kind that drags on for years. If he had been a true strategic genius unburdened by Thalmor manipulation, he might have sought alliances with the other provinces. He might have reached out to Hammerfell, which successfully repelled the Dominion, but he didn't. He isolated Skyrim. He preached Skyrim for the Nords, cutting off potential aid from the Redguards or the Bretons. This isolationism is exactly what the Dominion wants. They want the races of men divided. A united empire with Hammerfell and Skyrim is a threat. A lonely Skyrim fighting a lonely Cyrodiil is a playground for elven supremacy. The dormant phase ended the moment Ulfric decided to travel to Solitude. The dossier notes that his status changed to uncooperative once the war actively started, but the damage was already done during the cooperative years. The board was set, the pieces were moving. We have to ask ourselves, what was the trigger that moved him from dormant to active? the death of High King Torrig. When Ulfric walked into the Blue Palace, challenged Torrig and shouted him into oblivion, or simply stabbed him, depending on whose story you believe, he wasn't just killing a king. He was pressing the start button on the Thalmor's favourite game. The duel was the final act of the cooperative phase. It was the moment the asset went rogue in exactly the way the handler intended. The dossier implies a grim satisfaction with this outcome. Elenwen didn't need to tell him to kill Torrig. She just had to ensure that Ulfric felt there was no other option. By pressuring the Empire to enforce the Talos Ban more strictly in the years leading up to the duel, the Thalmor backed Ulfric into a corner where his honour demanded action. They engineered the pressure cooker, knowing the lid would eventually blow off. So, as we look back at the quiet years in Windhelm, we don't see a hero preparing for a righteous war. We see a tragic figure, isolated and paranoid, unwittingly following a script written in Alinor. He sat on the throne of Ysgramor, surrounded by the ghosts of his ancestors, while the ink on his dossier dried in the embassy. But the most shocking proof of his value as an asset wasn't in the quiet years. It was in the moment of his greatest peril. It was at Helgen. When the Empire finally caught him, when the clever ambush at Darkwater Crossing worked, and the asset was bound and gagged in the back of a cart the Thalmor didn't celebrate, they panicked. Why would the Thalmor panic at the capture of their greatest enemy? Why would Elenwen herself ride hard for Helgen, risking a diplomatic incident? Because General Tullius was about to do the one thing the Thalmor couldn't allow. He was about to end the war before it could truly begin. We now arrive at the beginning. The opening scene of Skyrim, the wagon ride. Hey you, you're finally awake. It's the most iconic intro in modern gaming, memed into oblivion. But amidst the nostalgia and the exposition about horse thieves, there is a frantic political drama playing out in the background that most first-time players completely miss. We are at Helgen, the execution block is ready, the headsman is sharpening his axe. General Tullius is there, looking smug. He has won. In a brilliant manoeuvre at Darkwater Crossing, he captured Ulfric Stormcloak. The leader of the rebellion is in chains. The war is effectively over. In an hour, Ulfric will be headless, the Stormcloaks will scatter, and the Empire will begin the slow process of reunification. And the Thalmor are absolutely terrified. Look closely at the scene again. As your cart rolls into the settlement, who do you see talking to General Tullius? It's Elenwen, the first emissary herself. She isn't there to enjoy the show. She's arguing with him. The dossier explicitly states, the incident at Helgen is an example where an exception had to be made. Obviously, Ulfric's death would have substantially increased the chance of an Imperial victory, and thus harmed our overall position in Skyrim. This is the smoking gun of the entire theory. Elenwen rode to Helgen to stop the execution. Think about the absurdity of that. The leader of the faction that hates elves the most, the man who wants to drive the Thalmor out of Skyrim, is about to be killed, and the head of the Thalmor is trying to save his life. Why? Because a dead Ulfric is useless to them. If Ulfric dies, the rebellion loses its figurehead. It loses the bear. Without him, the Stormcloaks are just a collection of angry farmers and disenfranchised soldiers. They would likely accept a pardon, or fade back into the hills. The war would end, and if the war ends, the Empire can stop bleeding resources into Skyrim. The legions can return to the border of Cyrodiil. The Empire becomes strong again. The Thalmor cannot allow that. They need the war to continue. They need the infinite stalemate. So Elenwen tries to pull rank. She likely argued that Ulfric was a prisoner of war under the jurisdiction of the White Gold Concordat, or that she needed to interrogate him further. She was desperate to get him out of Tullius's custody and back into the wild, or at least into a Thalmor cell from which he could escape again. But General Tullius, to his eternal credit, saw right through it. This is a core in-game fact that validates Tullius as a competent commander. He knew that if he brought Ulfric to Cyrodiil for trial, or let the Thalmor take him, Ulfric would somehow slip away. The politics would get in the way. So, he made a snap decision. Immediate execution. No trial, no delay. Cut off the head of the snake right here, right now, in this backwater town. It was the smartest move Tullius ever made. He ignored Elenwen's protests and ordered the prisoners to the block. He was minutes away from saving the Empire. The tension in that courtyard between Tullius and Elenwen is palpable. You can see her frustration. She stands there, watching her asset get lined up for the chop, knowing her carefully crafted civil war is about to fizzle out. She's watching years of work go down the drain. and then a dragon attacks. Now let's be clear, the Thalmor did not summon Alduin. That's a common misconception. The return of the dragons was a cosmic coincidence that just happened to align with Thalmor interests. But when Alduin landed on that tower and shouted the sky apart, he didn't just save the Dragonborn, he saved the Thalmor's plan. In the chaos, what happens? Ulfric escapes. And who lets him go? Not the Thalmor, not the Stormcloaks. You do, or Ralof does. But the confusion caused by the dragon allows the asset to slip the noose. The dossier notes this event with a sense of relief. It mentions that while the dragon crisis is a new variable, the survival of Ulfric ensures the war continues. The status quo of conflict is preserved. There is a fascinating bit of obscure lore regarding the cut content at Helgen. In earlier versions of the script, the argument between Elenwen and Tullius was audible. She was explicitly demanding custody of the prisoners. Tullius's refusal was much more vocal. The Emperor will hear of this, she threatens. Tullius replies with something akin to, "Let him hear it when the head is in a basket." This deleted dialogue underscores just how critical this moment was. It was a tug-of-war for the soul of Skyrim, fought between a general who wanted peace through victory and a diplomat who wanted war through survival. This leads to a community debate about Elenwen's agency. Did she know the dragon was coming? Some fans theorize she might have sensed the disturbance in the flow of time or magic. However, her reaction, fleeing the scene just like everyone else, suggests she was just as surprised. But being a Thalmor, she adapts quickly. The moment Ulfric is free, her mission changes from save the asset to monitor the asset. The irony of Helgen is thick enough to cut with a Daedric dagger. The player, the future hero of Skyrim, fights their way out of the keep. If you choose to follow Ralof, you are fighting alongside the very man whose survival guarantees the destruction of the province. You are helping the asset return to Windhelm to reignite the war. You are, in those first few minutes of gameplay, unwittingly working for the Thalmor. Every time you replay that intro, look at Elenwen. Don't look at the dragon. Look at the elf in the black robes. Realise that she is the only person in that courtyard who wants Ulfric to live as much as his own men do. This event solidifies the asset designation like nothing else. If he were truly the enemy of the Dominion, Elenwen would have offered to swing the axe herself. She would have smiled as his head rolled. The fact that she tried to intervene is the ultimate proof that Ulfric Stormcloak is more valuable to the Aldmeri Dominion alive than dead. So, Ulfric escapes. He returns to Windhelm. The war resumes. Tullius is forced to start over, frustrated and likely suspicious of the Thalmor's motives, and the dossier is updated. Status: active. The game is back on. But what exactly does it mean to be an uncooperative asset in an active war zone? How do you manage a weapon that wants to kill you? This brings us to the specific language of the dossier and the delicate dance of the civil war. The Thalmor don't just want the war to happen, they want it to happen in a very specific way. They need a stalemate, and to get a stalemate they need to ensure neither side gets too strong. Now that the war is back on, thanks to a very timely dragon intervention, we need to sit down and parse the language of the dossier again. We need to dissect the term uncooperative asset with the precision of an imperial scholar. It's a phrase that seems contradictory. How can you be an asset if you don't cooperate? How can you serve a master you despise? The answer lies in the difference between intent and outcome. Ulfric's intent is noble, at least in his own eyes. He wants to free Skyrim. He wants to worship Talos. He wants to drive the elves back to Somerset. He is uncooperative, because if Elenwen walked up to him and asked him to burn a village, he'd put an axe in her face. He does not take orders. He does not share intel willingly. He is hostile. If he saw a Thalmor patrol, he would kill them. But his outcome is pure Thalmor gold. Every time Ulfric rallies a hold to his banner, he weakens the Empire. Every Imperial soldier he kills is one less defender for the next great war. Every resource he forces the Empire to divert north is a resource stripped from the southern border. He is an asset because his existence and his actions advance the Thalmor's strategic goals, regardless of his personal feelings. Think of it like a forest fire. You don't cooperate with a fire. It's dangerous. It will burn you if you get too close. But if you are an arsonist who wants to clear the land, that fire is your best asset. You don't need to tell the fire where to go, you just need to make sure the firefighters don't put it out. The dossier makes this distinction clear. It warns the reader, presumably other high-ranking Thalmor, to approach him with extreme caution. It explicitly states, "Do not make the mistake of thinking he is under our control." This line is often cited by Stormcloak supporters as proof of his innocence. "See," they say, "the Thalmor don't control him." And they are right. The Thalmor don't control him. They direct him. They predict him. There is a subtle but vital core in-game fact hidden in the way the Civil War questline plays out. Have you ever noticed that the Thalmor never directly attack Stormcloak camps? You find Thalmor patrols attacking worshippers. You find them fighting bandits, but you rarely see a coordinated Thalmor offensive against a Stormcloak military target unless the player drags them into it. Why? Because they don't want to hurt the asset too much. They want the Stormcloaks to stay in the fight. Conversely, look at how they treat the Empire. The Thalmor are constantly undermining General Tullius. They demand access to prisoners, they interfere with his authority, and they generally make his job a nightmare. They are doing everything they can to hamper the efficiency of the Legion. They are handicapping the Empire to ensure the Stormcloaks have a fighting chance. This leads to an obscure lore tidbit found in the game files. The Thalmor seemingly have kill-on-sight orders for Stormcloaks, just like they do for anyone else. But strategically, their troop movements don't reflect a desire to wipe them out. In the game's systemic AI, factions are set to hate each other, but the narrative placement of forces tells a different story. The Thalmor presence is heavy in Halfengar, Imperial territory, and the Reach, Imperial territory. They are barely present in the Pale, Winterhold, or the Rift. They are keeping their boots on the necks of the Imperials, while leaving the Stormcloaks relatively unmolested in their home territories. This creates a community debate around the concept of agency. If Ulfric is doing exactly what the Thalmor want, does he have any true agency? Is he a tragic hero, or just a fool? The uncooperative tag saves his character from being a villain, but it damns him as liability. It suggests that his passion blinds him to the bigger picture. He's playing checkers while the elves are playing 4D chess. The dossier's language is cold and transactional. It treats Ulfric like a volatile stock on the market. Current status? Active. Operational notes? Direct contact remains a possibility only in extreme circumstances. They are managing a portfolio of chaos, and Ulfric is their best performer. The most chilling realization is that Ulfric likely suspects this. He is a smart man. He was a candidate for the Greybeards. He knows strategy. Deep down, in the quiet moments before dawn, he must wonder why the Dominion hasn't crushed him yet. He must wonder why Elenwen was at Helgen, but to acknowledge that truth would be to destroy his entire worldview. If he admits he's an asset, he admits his rebellion is a lie. So he pushes that thought down. He shouts it away. He focuses on the immediate enemy, the Empire, because that is a fight he can understand. He chooses to be uncooperative rather than aware. This psychological denial is what makes him such a perfect tool. An agent who knows they are an agent can turn double agent. An agent who thinks they are a free fighter is incorruptible because they believe in their own lie. So when you see that uncooperative asset tag, don't read it as rebellious hero. Read it as useful idiot. Read it as a man whose very defiance is being weaponized against the things he loves. He is the hammer the Thalmor are using to smash the Empire, and he thinks he's swinging himself. But the Thalmor's plan isn't just about having an asset. It's about the environment that asset creates. It's about the infinite stalemate. The war itself is the goal, not the victory of either side. And to understand why, we have to look at the economy of blood. We have to look at why the Thalmor are so terrified of a winner. The dossier is explicit about one thing above all else. The war must go on. Not the Stormcloaks must win, and certainly not the Empire must win. The goal is the conflict itself. A Stormcloak victory is also to be avoided, the text warns. This brings us to the strategy of the infinite stalemate. To understand why the Thalmor want a forever war in Skyrim, we have to look at the demographics of Tamriel. This is a cold, hard numbers game. Elves live a long time. High elves can live for centuries. Humans? They breed like rabbits, at least from an elven perspective, but they die young. In a straight-up war of attrition, humans can replenish their armies faster than elves can. It takes 20 years to grow a human soldier. It takes a century to grow an Ultima wizard. Therefore, the Dominion cannot afford to fight the Empire when the Empire is at full strength. They need the Empire to bleed itself. They need Nords killing Imperials. They need humans killing humans. Every Nord who dies in the Civil War is one less blade facing the Dominion in the next Great War. Every Imperial Legionnaire who takes an arrow to the knee in the pale is one less soldier defending the Gold Road in Cyrodiil. The infinite stalemate is a vampire strategy. It drains the lifeblood of the Empire drop by drop. This is a core in-game fact that you can see reflected in the game world. Talk to the legates and the Stormcloak commanders. Everyone mentions how tired they are. The supplies are running low, the armour is getting battered, the Jarls are complaining about the cost. The war is grinding Skyrim down to the bone. The roads are unsafe not just because of bandits, but because the patrols are thinned out fighting each other. The Thalmor are orchestrating this by carefully balancing the scales. If the Empire starts winning, the Thalmor interfere to hamper them, like at Helgen. If the Stormcloaks started winning too decisively, you can bet the Thalmor would find a way to sabotage them, perhaps by leaking intel to the Empire or assassinating key Stormcloak commanders to disrupt their momentum. They want the two sides locked in a death grip, neither strong enough to deliver the killing blow. There is an obscure lore tidbit here concerning the Great War lore books found in Skyrim. They mention that the Dominion took heavy losses during the Battle of the Red Ring. The invincible elven army was actually mauled. They are not ready for round 2 yet. They need time to rebuild their population and their magicka reserves. The civil war in Skyrim buys them that time. It keeps the Empire distracted and divided while Alinor rebuilds its strength. The Dossier's warning against a Stormcloak victory is fascinating. Why not let Ulfric win? If he wins, Skyrim leaves the Empire. The Empire loses a province. That sounds good for the Dominion, right? Not necessarily. A quick Stormcloak victory means the fighting stops. If Ulfric wins tomorrow, he secures his borders. He starts rebuilding. He starts training a new generation of warriors who are hyper-focused on killing elves. A sovereign independent Skyrim under Ulfric is a threat because it is a wild card. It might ally with Hammerfell. It becomes a fortress nation. Conversely, an imperial victory is bad because a united empire is a strong empire. If Tullius wins, he takes his seasoned legions back to Cyrodiil. He incorporates the Nord auxiliaries into the main army. The empire stabilizes. So, the only winning move for the Thalmor is not to play, but to make sure everyone else keeps playing. This creates a community debate about the Dragonborn's role. By choosing a side and ending the war, the player is technically acting against the Thalmor's primary goal. Whether you pick Empire or Stormcloak, simply finishing the questline is a blow to the Dominion. You are breaking the stalemate. You are stopping the bleeding. However, the tragedy is that by the time you end the war, the damage is often already done. The animosity between Nord and Imperial is cemented for a generation. The resources are spent. The best warriors are dead. The Thalmor view the civil war as a resource extraction operation where the resource is chaos. They are strip mining Skyrim for stability. They are banking the hatred. As you wander the camps, listen to the soldiers. My cousin's out fighting dragons, and what do I get? Guard duty. They are weary. They are disillusioned. This weariness is the Thalmor's greatest weapon. A tired population is easier to conquer. A cynical population is less likely to unite against a common foe. The infinite stalemate also serves a secondary purpose. It keeps the eyes of the Empire turned inward. As long as the Emperor is worrying about Windhelm, he isn't worrying about the movements of the Thalmor navy off the coast of Anvil. He isn't building up defences in the south. His gaze is fixed on the snow, while the knife approaches his back from the sand. Ulfric, in his blind zeal, cannot see this. He thinks every battle he wins is a step toward freedom. He doesn't realise that every battle he fights, win or lose, is a victory for Elenwen. He is trapped in a loop where his very success as a general contributes to the failure of humanity. The asset is doing exactly what he was designed to do. He's keeping the wheel of war turning. He's the engine of the stalemate, and as long as he breathes and shouts, the Dominion can sit back, drink their wine, and watch the Empire dismantle itself piece by piece. But the stalemate isn't just about numbers. It's about geography. It's about severing the limbs of the Empire to leave the head exposed. The separation of Skyrim from Cyrodiil is a strategic masterpiece that goes beyond just the civil war. It's about isolating the legions in the north, trapping them behind hostile mountains. The strategy of the infinite stalemate isn't just about draining manpower. It's about geography. It's about severing the Empire's limbs to expose its heart. We need to look at the map of Tamriel and realise that Ulfric's rebellion perfectly aligns with the most critical strategic goal of the Aldmeri Dominion, isolating the imperial heartland of Cyrodiil. Skyrim is the Empire's northern shield, a vast rugged landmass separated from the capital by the immense, snow-capped barrier of the Jarl Mountains. While these mountains act as a natural defence against invasion from the north, they are also a logistical nightmare for the Imperial legions. Supplies, men and messages must traverse narrow, winding paths like Pale Pass to enter or exit Skyrim. For the Empire, holding Skyrim is essential because it prevents a hostile force from flanking Cyrodiil from the north or sailing into the Sea of Ghosts to launch coastal attacks. When Ulfric started the Civil War, he essentially took control of this strategic choke point and aimed it at the Empire. Think about the legions under General Tullius. They are highly trained professional soldiers. They should be stationed on the southern borders, watching the coasts of Hammerfell and the deserts of Elsewhere, the likely routes of the next Dominion invasion. Instead, they are stuck in the bitter cold, chasing Stormcloaks through mountain forts and trying to maintain supply lines in the snow. The core in-game fact here is the immediate military complication of the rebellion. Ulfric's first move was to secure the eastern holds, including Eastmarch and the Rift. The Rift particularly sits right next to the border with Morrowind and is crucial for any eastern communication or movement. More importantly, these holds contain essential resources and manpower, and their control by the Stormcloaks forces the Imperial presence into a desperate defensive posture in the west, centred around Solitude. By cutting off the eastern half of Skyrim, Ulfric has ensured that the Imperial forces are now trapped. They have to rely on the extremely long and arduous routes back through High Rock, or the treacherous passes of the mountains to receive supplies and reinforcements from Cyrodiil. Every Imperial fort the Stormcloaks capture is one more link snapped in the logistical chain that connects the Legion in Skyrim to its home base. This is exactly what the Thalmor want. They see the Legions, the largest surviving organised fighting force of mankind, trapped in a hostile, resource-draining counterinsurgency operation far from the real theatre of war. The Dominion's strategy isn't about defeating the Imperial Legion in open battle in Skyrim. It's about making sure the Legion is exhausted, frozen and demoralised before the real battle begins in Cyrodiil. There is a grimly fascinating obscure lore tidbit regarding the structure of the Imperial military forces stationed in Skyrim. Before the Civil War, the Imperial Legion maintained an established rotational presence. General Tullius and the 4th Legion were sent specifically to handle the rebellion, but the forces were always meant to be temporary. The Civil War forced the Empire to commit these legions permanently to the region. The High Command in Cyrodiil must be tearing their hair out knowing they have their best troops stuck playing hide-and-seek with Ulfric in the freezing wilderness instead of preparing the defences of the capital. The Dominion is effectively using Ulfric to draw the Empire's firepower into a geographic isolation chamber. They let the Stormcloaks do the exhausting work of guerrilla warfare and siegecraft. And consider the absolute worst-case scenario for the Empire, a Stormcloak victory. If Ulfric wins and successfully drives the Legion out, Skyrim declares independence. Suddenly the northern flank of Cyrodiil is no longer protected by an Imperial province. It is protected by a hostile xenophobic kingdom that has explicitly stated its goal is to destroy the White Gold Concordat, and, by extension, the Empire that signed it. The Empire would then be forced to garrison the entire border of the Jarl Mountains with a significant number of troops that should be facing the Dominion. Ulfric would have successfully converted a secure Imperial province into a permanent hostile border that demands constant military attention from Cyrodiil. The cost of maintaining that new border defence against a nation that knows the mountain passes better than anyone would be astronomical. The Dominion wouldn't need to fire a single arrow. Ulfric's victory would guarantee the complete strategic isolation of Cyrodiil, leaving the Imperial city vulnerable to a swift, overwhelming attack from the south, where the legions are now dangerously thin. This situation leads to a profound community debate. Is the fight for Talos worship worth the price of guaranteed strategic isolation? Hardline Stormcloak fans argue that spiritual freedom is paramount, and if the Empire is too weak to defend its own gods, it deserves to fall. Loremasters, however, counter that Ulfric's freedom is merely a brief respite before a total Dominion occupation. They point out that a Talos-worshipping Skyrim that is independent is a much easier target for invasion than one that is united with the Empire, however imperfectly. Ulfric, the self-proclaimed defender of the Nords, is therefore acting as the perfect military wedge for the Dominion. He is sacrificing long-term security for short-term spiritual vengeance. He is so consumed by his hatred for the Empire, a hatred the Thalmor engineered back in the White Gold Tower, that he cannot see the true strategic value of unity. The Thalmor see the mountains of Skyrim not as an impediment, but as a cage, and Ulfric is the jailer. Every Nord soldier who freezes to death securing a mountain pass is a victory for Elenwen. Every time General Tullius has to pull a unit, from patrolling the Great Forest to reinforce a snow-covered fort, the Thalmor cheer in Alinor. This separation is far more damaging than just the loss of manpower. It is the loss of hope. It's the constant grinding realization that the Empire cannot even secure its oldest provinces, let alone stand up to the Dominion in the future. The sheer difficulty and cost of maintaining military presence in a rebellious, freezing province ensures that by the time the next Great War arrives, the legions will be too depleted, too distracted, and too far away to matter. Ulfric is not only fighting the Empire, he is physically carving out a giant hostile buffer zone around the Imperial capital, ensuring that the Dominion can launch its next campaign with minimal resistance from the northern provinces. He is the physical manifestation of the Thalmor's divide and conquer strategy, carving his name into the land with his own war axe, severing Skyrim from Cyrodiil. But the war isn't just driven by geography or guilt, it is fundamentally driven by religion. And the irony of the Talos Ban, the cause Ulfric claims to champion, is perhaps the most exquisite example of Thalmor manipulation yet. Ulfric forced the Dominion to enforce a ban that the Empire was perfectly happy to ignore. The bitter irony of Ulfric's entire campaign, the very cause for which thousands of Nords are freezing and dying, is that the existence of the civil war is the only reason the persecution of Talos worship is happening at all. Ulfric, the self-proclaimed bear of Markarth, is the ultimate catalyst for the suffering of the faithful. This is the paradox of the Talos Ban, and it reveals the exquisite, cruel genius of the Thalmor manipulation. To understand this, we need to go back to the White Gold Concordat, signed in 4E 175. This treaty, which ended the Great War, contained several humiliating clauses for the Empire, but the most egregious was the outlawing of the worship of Talos, the ninth divine and the deified human founder of the Septim dynasty. On paper, Talos worship was illegal, but in reality, for a brief fragile period after the war, the Empire didn't enforce it. The imperial government in Cyrodiil was shattered. The Emperor, Titus Mede II, knew that enforcing the ban on the Nords, his most loyal and volatile allies, would cause an immediate revolt he couldn't survive. So, they adopted a policy of studied negligence. It was the don't ask, don't tell era of Nord faith. People could pray quietly in their homes, they could wear their amulets hidden beneath their tunics. Priests could offer sermons in low whispers. The Empire maintained plausible deniability, and the Thalmor, themselves recovering from the Great War, lacked the manpower and the legal standing to press the issue aggressively. The ban was a theoretical humiliation, not a practical reality. And then, Ulfric marched on Markarth. As we discussed, when he forced the Empire to publicly concede the right to worship Talos in Markarth, he handed the Thalmor the undeniable, documented proof they needed that the Empire was failing to uphold the Concordat. The Empire had, by signing that decree for Ulfric, admitted that it was either unwilling or unable to control the religious practices within its own provinces. That signed document, a demand for freedom, was the core in-game fact that became the Justicia's arrest warrant. The Thalmor didn't need to conjure an army, they just needed a lawyer. They pointed to the clause in the Concordat that allowed them to ensure compliance if the Empire fell short, and the Emperor had no choice but to let them in. It was Ulfric's action that brought the first Thalmor Justicia patrol, the black-robed agents we love to hate, onto the roads of Skyrim with official, undisputed police power. Before Markarth, a Nord shouting a prayer to Talos might have earned a stern look from an Imperial officer. After Markarth, that Nord was dragged away to Northwatch Keep. Ulfric, by trying to win a small local victory for Talos, doomed the faith to widespread systemic persecution. The paradox is agonizing. The people who suffer the most from the Thalmor's active presence are the very ones Ulfric claims to protect. Consider Heimska, the priest in Whiterun. Before the war escalates, he stands publicly in the town square shouting prayers to Talos at the top of his lungs. He is annoying, yes, but he is free. The Imperial Jarl of Whiterun, Balgruuf the Greater, lets him do it. Why? Because Balgruuf, like most moderate Imperials, despises the ban but needs to keep the peace. He's looking the other way. But the moment Ulfric draws his sword against Balgruuf, forcing Whiterun into the war, The fragile peace is shattered. If Whiterun falls to the Stormcloaks, the persecution of the other half of Skyrim begins. If the Empire holds Whiterun, the pressure from the Thalmor increases exponentially, demanding Balgruuf crack down. The war itself forces the moderates to become radicals. There is an obscure lore tidbit that often surfaces regarding the Thalmor's true fear of Talos. While the High Elves claim Talos, the human Tiber Septim, is merely a mortal who cheated his way to divinity, some lore suggests their persecution is rooted in fear, not just arrogance. Talos, as a dragonborn god, is perhaps the greatest barrier to the Dominion's ultimate goal, decreation, or unmaking the world of man. If a man can ascend to divinity, then the inherent superiority of the elves is undermined. Therefore, Ulfric, by championing Talos, is inadvertently ensuring the Thalmor will never leave Skyrim, even if the Empire is defeated. He is drawing the target squarely on the province's back. This leads to the major community debate. Was Ulfric deliberately sacrificed by the gods? Some theorize that the gods, or perhaps Lorcan himself, allowed Ulfric to be broken by the Thalmor precisely because they knew his zealotry would create the chaos needed to hasten the return of the Dragonborn. The war needed to escalate to the point of execution, Helgen, to put the Dragonborn in the right place at the right time. Ulfric is thus less an asset of the Thalmor, and more a disposable self-detonating pawn of destiny itself. However, the simpler and more tragic truth is the one detailed in the dossier. Ulfric is simply a man whose personal trauma and guilt were exploited to create a regional civil war. His belief in Talos is genuine, but his methods are catastrophic. He is fighting for religious freedom by destroying the mechanisms that were quietly granting it to his people. His entire rebellion, therefore, is a masterpiece of counterintelligence. The Thalmor didn't ban Talos to get rid of the god. They banned Talos to gain a lever against the Empire. Ulfric grabbed that lever and pulled it until the Empire's defences crumbled and the Thalmor justiciars were standing in the throne room. The only way for the Thalmor plan to work is for Ulfric to remain passionate, proud, and entirely blind to the strategic reality of his actions. He must believe his way is the only way to redemption. This intense, almost pathological pride is the second clue we need to analyse. His ego is not just a character flaw. It is a weapon the Thalmor rely on for their strategy to succeed. The final piece of the Thalmor's psychological puzzle regarding Ulfric Stormcloak isn't his genuine patriotism or his manipulated religious zeal. It is something far more primal, far more universal, and far easier to exploit: his vanity. The Thalmor weaponized the Jarl's ego, the crushing desire to be High King, and by extension the singular saviour of the Nord people. Remember the trauma of the White Gold Tower. Ulfric was broken, made to feel responsible for the deaths of countless Imperial citizens. That kind of psychic wound doesn't heal. It calcifies into a desperate, unending need for justification. Ulfric doesn't just want Skyrim to be free. He needs Ulfric to be the one to free it. He needs the ultimate public vindication, a ceremonial cleansing of his sin through the acquisition of the High King's crown. The throne is his only path to redemption from the whispered accusation of traitor. The Thalmor knew this. They saw his pride and his ambition as a necessary weakness. A Jarl of Eastmarch, even a powerful one, is manageable. A man focused on legitimate political processes, like gathering the Jarls for a unified resistance, is unpredictable and dangerous. But a man obsessed with winning the crown through a display of pure ancient power, that man is a predictable grenade. This brings us to the core in-game fact that triggered the entire war: the challenge and subsequent death of High King Torygg in solitude. In the lore, the title of High King is generally decided by the Moot, a council of Jarls who vote on succession. Challenging the king to single combat, known as the Old Way, was rare, usually reserved for times of great dispute or war. Ulfric, using his magnificent sense of self-importance, marched to the Blue Palace and challenged the young Torygg, whom he subsequently killed with a single, devastating shout. This act, more than any other, reveals Ulfric's compromised psychology. He didn't challenge Torygg because it was the only way. He challenged Torygg because it was the most dramatic way. It was the quickest route to the crown, bypassing the tedious political process of persuading the other Jarls. He used the ancient sacred power of the voice, the power the Greybeards taught him not to use for violence, to commit political assassination, all to satisfy his ego's desperate need for immediate total validation. The Thalmor knew this ego would guarantee the necessary chaos. They knew Ulfric would never submit to the slow, consensus-based process of the moot. They knew he was too impatient, too fueled by self-righteous anger to wait for a legitimate vote that might have unified the province. His impatience for the crown forced the issue into bloodshed, and that bloodshed fractured Skyrim immediately. Half the Jarl saw it as a legitimate challenge and joined Ulfric. The other half, the moderates and the loyalists, saw it as murder, a violation of the sacred law, and rallied behind the widowed queen, Elisif, whom the Empire quickly endorsed. The murder of Torrig was the Thalmor's final perfect success in the manipulation of their asset. It turned a cold resentment into a hot, bloody, unwinnable war. There is a poignant, obscure lore tidbit that underlines the tragedy of this act. Dialogue and in-game books suggest that Torrig actually admired Ulfric. The young High King, chafing under the White Gold Concordat, was apparently considering secession himself. Elisif and others confirm that Torrig might have joined Ulfric if he had been approached diplomatically through the proper channels of the moot. Ulfric didn't need to kill Torrig to gain a free Skyrim, he only killed him to gain the crown. His ego prevented the political unity that might have successfully opposed the Dominion. This leads to a deeply engaging community debate. Did Torrig intentionally provoke Ulfric? Some theorists suggest Torrig felt so powerless under the Imperial yoke that he wanted to be killed by a true Nord hero, forcing the issue of secession through martyrdom. The theory suggests Torrig was hoping Ulfric's act would inspire unity. If this is true, Ulfric failed that final command spectacularly. Instead of inspiring unity, he inspired a civil war, making himself the problem rather than the solution. Ulfric's ultimate failure is that he chose vanity over leadership. A true leader who wanted freedom would have swallowed his pride, approached Torrig diplomatically, and worked to present a unified front of all 9 Jarls to the Empire, declaring a unified secession. This would have been a strong, organised move the Thalmor would have struggled to counter. But Ulfric's ego demanded the quick, bloody spectacle of the challenge, ensuring that his rebellion was politically messy and strategically weak from day one. The Thalmor knew exactly what to expect. They knew the moment Ulfric seized power through violence, Jarl Belgruf of Whiterun, the neutral pivot of the province, would turn against him. They knew Falkreath and the Reach would stand with the Empire out of spite and tradition. They knew that Ulfric's immediate crowning would guarantee a permanent perfect split. The asset was now fully active, fueled by a genuine belief in his own destiny, yet marching precisely to the tune the Thalmor had written years ago in that damp interrogation room. He is constantly compensating for the lie of his initial betrayal by seeking the ultimate truth of his kingship. As the narration continues, we must remember that Ulfric is not operating in a vacuum. He has a shadow, a right-hand man whose absolute, unquestioning loyalty serves as a crucial amplifier for the asset's destructive ego. Ulfric may be blinded by pride, but the man standing beside him, Galmar Stonefist, is blinded by simple, fierce devotion. Galmar's ignorance is the final essential element of the Thalmor's continued success. He is the loyal fool who keeps the war effort pure of any critical thought. Behind every tragic king, there is a loyal shield brother, a man who would march into oblivion without asking why, provided his liege led the way. For Ulfric Stormcloak, that man is Galmar Stonefist. If Ulfric is the tortured soul of the rebellion, Galmar is its iron fist, the physical manifestation of Nord resentment. And in the grand, cruel design of the Thalmor, Galmar is perhaps the most tragic figure of all, the unwitting accomplice who ensures the asset remains active, hostile, and destructive. To understand Galmar's role in this dossier of deception, we must step into the drafty, dimly lit war room of the Palace of the Kings. It's always cold in there. The stone floors seem to suck the heat right out of your boots. Standing over the map of Skyrim, pushing little flags around like toys, is Galmar. He wears the skin of a bear, literally, and his voice is a gravelly growl that sounds like rocks tumbling down a mountain. He is the quintessential Nord warrior, fierce, proud, and utterly devoid of subtle political nuance. While Ulfric broods on his throne, wrestling with the ghosts of the White Gold Tower and the weight of his crown, Galmar is the engine that keeps the war machine moving. He is the one recruiting soldiers. He is the one shouting death to the Empire. He is the one sending young men and women to die in the pale snow for a cause he believes is holy. The tragedy lies in his absolute sincerity. Galmar isn't a politician, he's a believer. He genuinely believes that Ulfric is the saviour of Skyrim. He believes that the Empire is a rotting carcass that needs to be cut away so the Nords can breathe. He hates the elves with a purity that borders on religious fervour. If you told him that his actions were directly helping the Thalmor, he'd probably try to cut your head off before you finished the sentence. But let's look at the tactical reality of Galmar's advice. Throughout the Civil War questline, whenever there is a choice between a diplomatic solution or a strategic pause, an immediate bloody escalation, Galmar chooses escalation. He is the devil on Ulfric's shoulder, constantly whispering that peace is weakness and negotiation is treason. Take the core in-game fact of the Jagged Crown quest. This is one of the first major missions Galmar assigns you. The Jagged Crown is a legendary artifact, a symbol of high kingship made from the bones of ancient dragons. Galmar is obsessed with finding it. Why? Because he believes that if Ulfric wears the hat, the Jarls will fall in line. He prioritizes the symbol of power over the reality of alliances. Instead of advising Ulfric to secure a trade deal with Hammerfell or negotiate a non-aggression pact with High Rock, moves that would actually strengthen an independent Skyrim against the Dominion, Galmar sends his best soldier, you, into a Draugr-infested ruin to fetch a piece of bone. He's focused on the pageantry of the rebellion, on the old ways, rather than the geopolitical chessboard. By focusing on these ancient rites, he ensures that the war remains a local internal conflict about Nord tradition, rather than a broad coalition against the Thalmor. He keeps the scope of the war exactly where the Thalmor want it, contained within Skyrim's borders. The dossier doesn't mention Galmar by name, but his presence is felt in the asset's continued uncooperativeness. A handler like Elenwen knows that an asset needs a support system to function. If Ulfric were surrounded by cautious advisors who questioned the wisdom of fighting the Empire alone, the rebellion might have fizzled out or turned into a diplomatic movement. But with Galmar shouting, "Victory or Sovngarde!" every 5 minutes, Ulfric is insulated from doubt. Galmar acts as an echo chamber, reinforcing Ulfric's programmed behaviour. There is a fascinating obscure lore tidbit found in the game files regarding Galmar's own history. Like Ulfric, Galmar is a veteran of the Great War. He fought in the legions. He saw the Dominion's cruelty firsthand. His hatred is born from the same trauma as Ulfric's, but his reaction is different. Ulfric internalized it as guilt. Galmar externalized it as rage. This makes him the perfect enabler. He validates Ulfric's pain, but channels it into the exact wrong direction. He doesn't want Ulfric to heal. He wants Ulfric to hurt the people he blames for the pain, the Empire. The community has engaged in a significant debate regarding Galmar's competence versus his bloodlust. Some players view him as a true Nord hero, the only one with the guts to do what needs to be done. They see his aggression as necessary in a fight for survival. However, the more critical interpretation, and the one that aligns with the Thalmor theory, is that Galmar is strategically incompetent. He is a tactician, not a strategist. He knows how to win a battle, but he doesn't know how to win a war. Consider his dialogue during the battle for Whiterun. He is eager to sack the city. He doesn't care about the destruction of a major trade hub or the alienation of the neutral Jarl Balgruuf. He just wants to see the Imperial banner burn. This myopia plays directly into Elenwen's hands. The destruction of Whiterun weakens Skyrim's economic infrastructure, making a post-war recovery harder and leaving the province more vulnerable to Dominion influence. Galmar is practically dismantling his own country's defences in the name of saving it. Galmar also serves as the gatekeeper. He isolates Ulfric. When you first arrive in Windhelm, it is Galmar who tests you. He decides who gets to see the Jarl. He filters out the dissenting voices. He surrounds Ulfric with true sons and daughters of Skyrim, effectively creating a cult of personality that blinds the leadership to the reality of the situation. He ensures that no Imperial spy, but also no reasonable moderate, can get close enough to Ulfric to say, "Hey, maybe we should stop killing our cousins and focus on the elves." If the Thalmor were to design a perfect second-in-command for their uncooperative asset, they would build Galmar Stonefist. They need someone loyal enough to keep Ulfric safe from assassins, but aggressive enough to keep him fighting. They need someone who hates the Empire so much that they will ignore the obvious threat of the Dominion until it is too late. There is a tragic irony in Galmar's relationship with the Dragonborn. If you join the Stormcloaks, he calls you Stormblade. He treats you like family. He trusts you implicitly. Yet by helping him, you are helping the Thalmor. Every fort you take for Galmar, every Imperial patrol you ambush at his command, is a check mark on Elenwen's clipboard. You and Galmar are the most effective employees the Thalmor never hired. Imagine the scene at the end of the Stormcloak questline, if you choose that path. General Tullius is cornered, Galmar is there, axe in hand, ready to execute the Imperial General. He is triumphant. He thinks he has won. He thinks he has freed Skyrim. He has no idea that by killing Tullius, he has just removed the one man who actually understood the Thalmor threat. He has just decapitated the only force capable of holding the line against the next Dominion invasion. In his moment of greatest victory, Galmar is sealing his people's doom. And the worst part? He would never believe it. Galmar's mind is a fortress. The idea that Ulfric is compromised or that the war is a trap is simply too complex, too dishonourable for him to entertain. He operates on a binary logic. Nords good, Empire bad. The Thalmor exploit this simplicity. They know that as long as Galmar is whispering in Ulfric's ear, the asset will never go dormant again. So, while Ulfric is the puppet, Galmar is the gravity that keeps the puppet on the stage. He prevents Ulfric from walking away. He keeps the fires of resentment stoked. He is the loyal dog guarding a burning house, biting the firemen because he thinks they are intruders. But not everyone in Skyrim is as blind as the Stonefist. High up on the mountain, far above the petty squabbles of jarls and generals, there are men who see the world differently. They see the voice not as a weapon of war, but as a song of the sky. And the leader of these men, Arngeir, has a warning that cuts through the political noise and strikes at the heart of the Thalmor's deception. He knows that the war is not just a tragedy, it is a metaphysical disaster. High above the blood-soaked snow and the petty squabbles of jarls, there is silence. To reach it, you have to climb the 7,000 steps. A journey that usually involves getting yeeted off a cliff by a frost troll who regenerates health faster than you can chug potions. But if you survive the pilgrimage and the altitude sickness, you arrive at High Hrothgar, the monastery of the Greybeards. It is here, in the thin air of the throat of the world, that we find a perspective on the war that is completely detached from politics yet intimately connected to the fate of reality. We find Arngeir, the eldest of the Greybeards, who can still speak without turning your bones to jelly. And if you listen to him, really listen, you realise that he understands the trap Ulfric has walked into better than anyone else in Skyrim. The Greybeards are the masters of the way of the voice. They believe that the Thu'um is a form of worship, a way to contemplate the sky, not a tool to murder your neighbours. Ulfric Stormcloak was once their student. He was chosen. He spent years in those stone halls learning to speak the language of dragons. He was on the path to becoming a Greybeard himself. When the Great War broke out, Ulfric left. He abandoned his training to fight for the Empire. Arngeir views this not as heroism, but as a tragic fall from grace. He sees Ulfric's use of the voice in battle, like shouting the Forsworn off the walls of Markarth or shouting Torrig into oblivion, as a perversion of the sacred art. But Arngeir's warning goes deeper than just disappointment in a dropout student. During the quest, Season Unending, where you force the Empire and Stormcloaks to sit down at a negotiation table in the monastery, Arngeir is visibly disgusted by the presence of the political leaders. When Elenwen walks in, the tension spikes. Here is the core in-game fact that chills the blood. Arngeir explicitly warns the Dragonborn that the civil war is feeding Alduin. He explains that the dragons feed on the souls of the dead, on the strife and the chaos. By prolonging the war, the mortals of Skyrim are literally strengthening the World Eater. Connect this dot to the Thalmor. The Thalmor goal is to prolong the war to weaken the Empire. The byproduct of this prolonged war is the strengthening of Alduin, who wants to devour the world. While the Thalmor might not be intentionally teaming up with a giant black dragon, their goals are terrifyingly aligned. Both the Dominion and the dragons thrive on the destruction of mankind. Arngeir sees the war for what it truly is, a distraction. It is a petty squabble over borders and crowns while the apocalypse looms overhead. He realises that Ulfric's rebellion is keeping the Dragonborn and the rest of Skyrim focused on the wrong enemy. Every moment spent fighting over Whiterun is a moment not spent fighting the end of the world. The Thalmor love this distraction. The dossier proves they want to keep the asset active to maintain the stalemate. Arngeir, in his wisdom, recognises that this stalemate is a death spiral. He tries to warn you that taking a side is ultimately futile if the world ends. He's the only character who looks at General Tullius and Ulfric Stormcloak and sees two children fighting over a toy in a burning house. There is an obscure lore tidbit regarding the Greybeard's philosophy on the Kalpa. In Elder Scrolls cosmology, the world goes through cycles of creation and destruction called Kalpas. Alduin's role is to eat the world so the next Kalpa can begin. Some interpretations of Greybeard philosophy suggest they are fatalists. They believe that if it's time for the world to end, one shouldn't stop it. However, Arngeir's specific disdain for the Civil War suggests a nuance. He hates useless destruction. He hates that the Nords are destroying themselves for nothing. He knows that Ulfric is using a spiritual power, the voice, to achieve a material goal, the crown, and that this spiritual violation creates a weakness in the fabric of the world that the Thalmor are all too happy to exploit. Arngeir also likely knows about Elenwen. The Greybeards are isolated, but they are not blind. They can feel the words of power echoing across the land. They felt the shout that killed Torrig. They felt the shouts at Markarth. Arngeir knows that his former student has become a weapon. When he looks at Ulfric across the negotiation table, he doesn't see a king. He sees a tragedy. He sees a man who took a gift meant for peace and turned it into an instrument of genocide. This leads to a fierce community debate regarding the Greybeards' inaction. Many players hate the Greybeards. They call them cowards for sitting on a mountain while the world burns. They argue, if you have the power to shout people apart, you should use it to stop the Thalmor. This is the with great power comes great responsibility argument, but the counter-argument, the one Arngeir embodies, is that using power is the problem. The Thalmor want to impose their will on reality. They want to unmake the world of man. If the Greybeards descend from the mountain and start shouting armies apart, they become just another warlord faction. They become just like Ulfric. They become just like the Thalmor. By refusing to fight, they are the only ones actually resisting the nature of the Thalmor, which is domination. Arngeir's warning is a subtle condemnation of the asset. He implies that Ulfric has lost his way so completely that he can no longer distinguish between right and power. The Thalmor have manipulated Ulfric into believing that because he can shout, he should rule. They have fed his ego, as discussed in the previous section, to the point where he thinks his voice is the voice of Skyrim. Arngeir knows better. He knows the voice belongs to the sky, and using it to tax trade routes or banish elves is a profanity. When you sit at that council table and season unending, watch Arngeir. He is the moderator. He forces Elenwen to leave the table, or stay depending on your choices, but he clearly dislikes her. He treats the Thalmor emissary not with fear, but with a cold, distant revulsion. He knows that she is the architect of the misery sitting opposite him. He looks at Ulfric, then at Elenwen, and he sees the invisible strings. He doesn't say Ulfric is a Thalmor asset out loud. That's not the Greybeard way, but he says, the war, it creates a delicious meal for Alduin. He's telling you that the conflict is artificial. It is manufactured sustenance for a monster, whether that monster is a literal dragon or the metaphorical maw of the Aldmeri Dominion, the result is the same. Skyrim is being eaten alive. The Greybeards represent the old ways that Ulfric claims to love, yet Ulfric ignores their counsel entirely. He fetishizes their power but rejects their wisdom. This is the ultimate proof of his corruption. He wears the aesthetic of a traditional Nord, the furs, the axe, the voice, but he acts with the impatience and the ambition of a mundane politician. The Thalmor have successfully stripped the spirituality out of the Stormcloak movement and left only the violence. As you leave High Hrothgar descending back into the cloud of war, Arngeir's words linger. Skyrim will not remember you if there is no Skyrim left. It's a chilling reminder that while Ulfric worries about who sits on the throne, the Thalmor are worrying about who controls the future of the continent, and the dragons are worrying about eating the timeline. Ulfric is playing a game of checkers, the Thalmor are playing chess, and Arngeir is watching the board rot from underneath them both. But there is one other person at that table who sees the board clearly. He isn't a mystic monk or a dragon priest. He's a tired, pragmatic soldier from Cyrodiil, who hates the snow, hates the magic, and hates the politics. General Tullius. And in his final moments, or in his moments of candour, he reveals that he knows exactly who the real winner of this war is. Leaving the metaphysical heights of High Hrothgar, we descend back to sea level, to the cold, stiff, and disciplined atmosphere of Castle Dour in Solitude. If Windhelm is a city of shouting and ancient stones, Solitude is a city of laws, bureaucracy, and uncomfortable formal wear. and sitting at the centre of this web of imperial red tape is General Tullius. Tullius is often painted by players, especially those swept up in the romantic Braveheart narrative of the Stormcloaks, as the villain. He's the grumbling, out-of-touch military governor who doesn't respect Nord culture. He complains about the cold. He complains about the mead. He looks like he'd trade the entire province of Skyrim for a decent heated bath and a glass of Cyrodiilic brandy. But if you strip away the grumpy exterior, you find the only man in Skyrim who's actually looking at the map the right way up. General Tullius is the foil to Ulfric. Where Ulfric is poetry, passion and ego, Tullius is prose, pragmatism and duty. He isn't fighting for glory, he is fighting to clean up a mess. And the tragedy of General Tullius is that he knows, with a sinking certainty, that even if he wins the civil war, he hasn't really won the fight. He knows that he is just a janitor sweeping up blood while the house burns down. The dossier describes Ulfric as an asset, but it doesn't have a label for Tullius. If it did, it would probably be obstacle. Tullius is the variable the Thalmor are trying to neutralize. Remember, at Helgen, Tullius was the one who tried to execute Ulfric immediately. He cut through the diplomatic protocols because he recognized that as long as Ulfric breathed, the Thalmor had a lever to pry the Empire apart. Throughout the Imperial questline, Tullius's frustration is palpable. But it's not just frustration with the rebel barbarians, it's frustration with his own allies. He has to govern a province while the Thalmor look over his shoulder, criticizing his methods, demanding prisoner transfers, and patrolling his roads. There is a core in-game fact that perfectly encapsulates Tullius's awareness of the situation. It happens at the very end of the Imperial Legion questline. You have besieged Windhelm, you have smashed through the barricades, you have fought your way into the Palace of the Kings. Ulfric Stormcloak lies dead or dying at your feet. The war is over. The rebellion is crushed. In this moment of triumph, most conquerors would give a speech about glory. They would talk about the might of the Empire. But Tullius? He turns to you and says something remarkably sober. He mentions that the rebellion is over, but then he adds, almost under his breath, the Thalmor aren't going to like this. That single line reveals everything. It confirms that Tullius knows the Thalmor wanted the war to continue. He knows that by crushing the Stormcloaks, he hasn't just defeated a rebel army, he has ruined the Dominion's favourite game. He understands that the infinite stalemate was the goal, and by achieving a decisive victory he has forced the Thalmor to recalculate. This realization transforms Tullius from a generic antagonist into a weary, tragic hero. He's fighting two wars at once. He's fighting the Stormcloaks on the battlefield with swords and arrows, and he's fighting the Thalmor in the embassy with silence and delay tactics. He's trying to preserve the Empire's strength in the north so that it can eventually turn south and face the Aldmeri Dominion again. There is an obscure lore tidbit hidden in the radiant dialogue of solitude that reinforces this. If you listen to Tullius speak to his second-in-command Legate Rikke, he often expresses confusion about why the Thalmor are so interested in specific, seemingly minor events. He senses the manipulation. Rikke, a Nord who follows the old ways but stays loyal to the Empire, often tries to explain the cultural context to him. But Tullius, with his military mind, cuts to the chase. It's all a waste of resources. He views the Civil War not as a struggle for freedom, but as a hemorrhage. Every Imperial soldier who dies in the snow is a soldier who won't be there to defend the Imperial city. This brings us to a significant community debate. Is Tullius a puppet of the Emperor, or is he a rogue agent of stability? Some fans argue that because the Emperor signed the White Gold Concordat, Tullius is just enforcing a corrupt law. They see him as a just-following-orders bureaucrat. But others argue that Tullius is actually subverting the spirit of the Concordat by trying to end the war quickly. The Concordat benefits the Thalmor most when the Empire is weak. By strengthening the Empire through a swift victory, Tullius is technically serving the Emperor's long-term interests, even if he has to be brutal in the short term. The debate often centres on his attitude toward Nord culture. "You Nords and your damn honour," he scoffs. To the player, this sounds like an insult. But in the context of the dossier, it's a lament. He sees honour as the button the Thalmor are pressing to make the Nords kill themselves. He wishes the Nords would be less honourable and more practical, because if they were practical, they'd realise that uniting with the Empire is the only way to survive the Dominion. Let's go back to the season-unending Peace Council for a moment. Watch Tullius interact with Elenwen there. Unlike Ulfric, who shouts and postures, Tullius is icy. He hates that she is there. He resists her input. When she demands to oversee the negotiations, Tullius is the first to bristle, though he knows he has to maintain diplomatic protocol. You can see the muscles in his jaw working. He is a general who is used to command, forced to play nice with the enemy's spy chief. He knows she is feeding the conflict. He likely suspects that she is feeding Ulfric, or at least enabling him, and this knowledge eats away at him. It makes him cynical. It makes him tired. In the alternative ending, if the Stormcloaks win and conquer Solitude, Tullius's death scene is equally revealing. He doesn't beg. He doesn't rage. He simply tells Ulfric, "You realise this is exactly what they wanted." Even with a sword at his throat, his final thought isn't for his own life. It's for the strategic disaster that Ulfric has just unleashed. He tries, one last time, to tell the asset that he is an asset. But Ulfric, blinded by victory, just kills him. Tullius dies knowing that he was the only adult in a room full of children playing with fire. The tragedy of General Tullius is that he is the right man in the wrong movie. He is a serious modern military commander stuck in a mythical hero's journey. He is trying to talk logistics and supply lines while everyone else is talking about Dragonborn and magic shouts. And his resignation at the end of the war, even the victorious end, is profound. He knows the peace is temporary. He knows the Thalmor will be back. He mentions that he expects to be recalled to Cyrodiil soon. Why? To prepare. The Great War too is on the horizon. Tullius knows that the battle for Skyrim was just a skirmish. The real war is coming, and thanks to the Civil War, the Empire is limping into it. He looks at the dossier, metaphorically speaking, and he burns it. He rejects the game. He forces a conclusion, but he does so with no joy. So when you walk into Castle Dour and see Tullius staring at his map, don't just see an imperial oppressor. See a man who is frantically trying to tape a crumbling empire back together before the wolves kick the door down. He is the only one who realises that victory or Sovngarde is a false dichotomy. The real choice is unity or extinction. And while Tullius fights the war with steel and strategy, Elenwen fights it with whispers and wine. She is the presence that hovers over every negotiation, every battle, and every death. We need to look closely at her behaviour during the Peace Council, because her actions there confirm everything the dossier suggests. She isn't just an observer, she is an active participant in the sabotage of peace. We return to the freezing heights of the throat of the world, but this time the atmosphere inside the monastery is even colder than the blizzard outside. We are discussing the quest Season Unending, a moment that many players try to skip by rushing the Civil War questline, but which serves as a masterclass in Thalmor geopolitics. It is here, around a heavy stone table, that we see Elenwen not as a distant puppet master, but as a player at the board, desperate to keep her game from being flipped over. The context is crucial. The Dragonborn has summoned the leaders of both factions to negotiate a temporary truce. The goal is simple: stop killing each other for 5 minutes so we can trap a dragon in Whiterun and save the world. It's a reasonable request, but for Elenwen this truce is a disaster. Peace, even a temporary one, is the enemy of the infinite stalemate. A truce allows supply lines to reopen. It allows soldiers to sleep. It allows the Empire to reorganise. So, uninvited and unwelcome, Elenwen arrives. Her entrance is a piece of calculated theatre. She walks into High Hrothgar with the entitlement of a landlord inspecting a tenant's apartment. She claims her presence is necessary because the Empire is a signatory of the White Gold Concordat, and therefore any imperial negotiation is Dominion business. This is the core in-game fact that drives the tension. She is technically right. Legally she has a seat at the table, but morally her presence is a gasoline fight waiting to happen. Watch her eyes during this scene. She isn't looking at the greybeards with reverence. She isn't looking at the Dragonborn with hope. She's looking at the map. The negotiation involves swapping holds. You give me Markarth, I give you Riften. It's a high-stakes barter of territory. Elenwen's interest here is profound. She wants to ensure that neither side gains a decisive geographical advantage. If the Empire gives up Markarth, the city of stone and silver, to the Stormcloaks, Ulfric gains immense wealth and a defensible fortress. If the Stormcloaks give up the Rift, the Empire secures the southern border and the pass to Morrowind. Elenwen is silently calculating the asset's value in real time. If Ulfric gets too strong, gets Markarth, he might actually win, which he doesn't want. If he gets too weak, loses his best ports, he might be crushed, which she also doesn't want. She is rooting for a bad deal. She wants a treaty that leaves everyone unhappy and the borders messy, ensuring that when the truce expires, the fighting will be even more vicious than before. This brings us to the dynamic between Elenwen and Ulfric at the table. It is electric with hatred. Ulfric refuses to speak while she is present. "She is the head of the Thalmor in Skyrim," he growls. "I will not negotiate while she is in the room." To the casual observer, this looks like Ulfric standing his ground. It looks like the defiance of a free man, but through the lens of the dossier, it looks like a trauma response. He cannot sit across from his former handler. He cannot look at the woman who broke him in the White Gold Tower and pretend to be a king. Her presence reminds him of what he really is, an asset, and Elenwen knows this. There is a strong argument to be made that she attended the council specifically to provoke him. She knows that her mere presence makes Ulfric irrational. She knows that if she sits there smirking, Ulfric will make unreasonable demands just to spite her. She's using herself as a psychological prop to sabotage the peace talks from the inside. By being there, she ensures the negotiation is hostile, fragile, and likely to break down the moment the dragon is dead. There is an obscure lore tidbit hidden in the mechanics of this quest. The game assigns a numerical score to the treaty to determine if it is balanced. If the player favours one side too heavily, the other side may refuse. However, Elenwen has dialogue lines, some unused or rare, where she comments on the concessions. If the Empire gives away too much, she berates Tullius. Why? Because a weak Empire is bad for the facade of the Concordat. She needs the Empire to look strong enough to be a threat, but act weak enough to lose ground. She's micromanaging the decline of the Empire in real time, but the most telling moment comes if you choose to kick her out. The player, as the Arbiter, has the power to say, "Elenwen, leave!" Her reaction is not the cool, diplomatic brushing off of an insult. She is furious. She loses her composure. "You are making a terrible mistake," she hisses. Why is she so angry? It's not just pride, it's the loss of intelligence. If she leaves the room, she doesn't know where the new lines are drawn. She doesn't know which forts are being traded. She goes blind. For a spy master, blindness is death. If the asset is being moved around the board without her supervision, she cannot guarantee the outcome. Her panic at being ejected confirms that her primary goal in Skyrim isn't diplomacy. It's monitoring the variables of her experiment. This leads to a fascinating community debate. Is it better to keep her in the room or kick her out? Stormcloak supporters argue you must kick her out to respect Ulfric and assert dominance. Imperial supporters often argue she should stay to keep the Thalmor close where you can watch them, or that kicking her out needlessly antagonises the Dominion before the Empire is ready. But the dossier theory suggests a third option. Kicking her out is the best thing you can do, not for Ulfric, but for the world. By removing her influence, you allow the humans, and the Dragonborn, to make a deal based on immediate necessity, stopping Alduin, rather than Thalmor manipulation. When she's gone, the tone shifts. It becomes a negotiation between generals, not a performance for an audience. However, even if she leaves, her shadow remains. The map on the table is the map she helped draw. The war being paused is the war she started. Let's look at the specific territories often traded. The Reach, Markarth, is a hotbed of forsworn activity, another destabilising element. If Ulfric takes Markarth, he inherits the forsworn problem. Elenwen loves this. It means the Stormcloaks will bleed resources fighting the natives of the Reach, instead of fighting the Empire. It's a distraction within a distraction. If the Empire takes Riften, they gain control of the Thieves Guild's home city, a city of corruption and crime. Elenwen probably finds this amusing, but strategically, it cuts off the Stormcloak supply lines from Morrowind. Every flag moved on that map changes the calculus of the infinite stalemate. Elenwen's job at the council is to do the mental math. She's calculating. If Ulfric gets the silver mines, can he afford better armour? If he gets better armour, does the war last 2 years longer? Excellent. The Peace Council also highlights the difference between Tullius and Ulfric regarding Elenwen. Tullius tolerates her because he has to. He rolls his eyes. He sighs. He knows she's a vulture. Ulfric engages with her, even by refusing to engage. His emotional volatility regarding Elenwen is the tell. It's the sign that he isn't over the interrogation. A truly free leader would treat her with cold indifference. Ulfric treats her with hot, passionate hatred. And as the old saying goes, the opposite of love isn't hate, It's indifference. Hate is still a connection. Elenwen exploits this connection to the bitter end. Even as she is forced to leave, if you choose so, she likely signals her agents to double their efforts. The asset is off the leash. Watch him. The season-unending quest is a microcosm of the entire Civil War. It's a room full of people arguing about power, while the Thalmor agent watches and takes notes, and the literal apocalypse waits outside. It proves that Elenwen is not afraid of Ulfric. She is not afraid of the Stormcloaks. She is afraid of order. She is afraid of a solution. When the council concludes and the treaty is signed, the war pauses. But notice the dialogue. Both Tullius and Ulfric say, "This isn't over." They are eager to get back to killing each other. The truce is agonizing for them. Elenwen has done her job well. She has conditioned them so thoroughly to hate each other that even when the World Eater is burning down the sky, they can barely stand to sit in the same room for an hour. The dossier doesn't have an entry for the Peace Council, but if it did, it would likely read, "The asset remains volatile. The ceasefire is a temporary setback, but the animosity is entrenched. Hostilities will resume. The stalemate is secure." As we prepare to leave the negotiation table and look toward the endgame, we have to consider the final terrifying possibility. What if Elenwen fails? What if the asset actually wins? We need to look at the Stormcloak victory doom scenario. Because if Ulfric actually manages to drive the Empire out of Skyrim, he isn't winning freedom. He's rolling out the red carpet for an invasion that will make the Civil War look like a tavern brawl. So we arrive at the end of the line, the hypothetical future where the asset wins. Let's imagine for a moment that you, the Dragonborn, have donned the blue sash. You have stormed Solitude, forced General Tullius to surrender, and watched as Ulfric Stormcloak drove his sword into the man who tried to save the Empire. The Legion is gone. The Penitus Oculatus has fled. Skyrim is independent. The crowds are cheering in the streets, raising flagons of mead to the true High King. But as the shouting dies down and the hangover sets in, a cold, hard silence descends on the province. And in that silence, we see the Stormcloak victory doom scenario for what it truly is. The final phase of the Thalmor plan. The dossier warned that a Stormcloak victory was to be avoided, but let's be clear about why. It wasn't because the Dominion feared an independent Skyrim. It was because a Stormcloak victory ends the infinite stalemate too early. It stops the bleeding before the patient is fully dead. However, if the stalemate must end, a Stormcloak victory is infinitely preferable to an Imperial one for the Dominion, because it leaves Skyrim isolated, impoverished, and technologically backward. Let's look at the geopolitical reality of King Ulfric's new realm. He has just severed ties with the Empire. That means he has severed ties with the East Empire Company. He has cut off the grain shipments from Cyrodiil that feed the snowy, non-arable holds of the Pale and Winterhold. He has lost the coin of the Empire. Skyrim is now a pariah state. And who is waiting in the wings? The Aldmeri Dominion. There is a prevalent community debate that Stormcloak supporters love to cite. Hammerfell did it. They argue that the Red Guards of Hammerfell rejected the White Gold Concordat, fought the Dominion alone, and forced them to a standstill. If Hammerfell can beat the elves, why can't Skyrim? It's a seductive argument, but it ignores three critical factors. First, Hammerfell was united. The Crowns and the Forebears, the two political factions of the Red Guards, put aside their differences to fight the external threat. Skyrim, by contrast, has just spent years slaughtering its own people. The country is broken. Half the Jarls, the ones you deposed, hate Ulfric. The population is decimated. There is no unity here, only a conqueror and the conquered. Second, the geography is different. Hammerfell has the Alika Desert, a brutal environment that kills invaders through attrition. Skyrim has mountains, yes, but its major cities, Solitude, Windhelm, Dawnstar, are coastal. They are vulnerable to naval power. And this brings us to the third and most terrifying point, the Aldmeri Navy. The High Elves are the supreme naval power of Tamriel. The Imperial Navy was the only force capable of checking them, and Ulfric just kicked the Imperial Navy out of his ports. He has no fleet. He has longships, raiding vessels designed for quick strikes, not ship to line, combat against galleons raining magical destruction from a mile away. This leads us to a core in-game fact that is often overlooked in the euphoria of victory. In Ulfric's victory speech, he explicitly mentions that he knows the elves are coming. We will prepare for their return, he says, but look at his preparations. He is rebuilding walls. He's training men with axes. He's preparing for a ground war, but the Dominion won't fight a ground war. Not at first. They will simply blockade the Sea of Ghosts. They will park their massive warships outside Solitude and Windhelm and starve the Nords out. They will cut off trade. They will let the harsh Skyrim winter do the work for them. And when the Nords are hungry, freezing and desperate, then the Dominion will land. There is an obscure lore tidbit regarding the magical capabilities of the Dominion that makes this scenario even bleaker. The Altmer are masters of dawn magic and advanced destruction spells that human armies struggle to counter without Imperial battle mages. The Imperial Legion has its own battle mages to balance the scales. The Stormcloaks, they mistrust magic. They view it as elven trickery. A Stormcloak army is an army of infantry marching into a meat grinder of fireballs and lightning storms. They are bringing iron axes to a nuclear war. So, picture the scene a year after the victory. King Ulfric sits on the throne in Windhelm. The crown is heavy. The reports are piling up. The mines in Markarth are failing because there's no one to buy the silver. The Grey Quarter is rioting. The Jarls are squabbling. And then, a messenger arrives from the coast. Black sails on the horizon, my king, hundreds of them. This is the moment the asset becomes the liability. Elenwen doesn't need to be diplomatic anymore. She doesn't need to host parties or write dossiers. She just needs to give the order. The invasion of an independent Skyrim would be swift and brutal. Without the Empire to draw Dominion forces south to Cyrodiil, the Thalmor can concentrate their entire northern fleet on Solitude. The city would fall in days. The Blue Palace would become Elenwen's new summer home. Ulfric would realise too late the magnitude of his mistake. He would realise that the Empire he hated was actually the wall that kept the monsters out. He would scream for the High Rock Bretons to help, but they would remain loyal to the Empire he betrayed. He would call for Hammerfell, but the Redguards would look at his weakened, divided kingdom and see a lost cause. He would be alone, and in the end, Ulfric Stormcloak would die not as a hero, but as the man who handed his homeland to the executioner on a silver platter. He would die realising that every speech he gave, every battle he won, every "for Skyrim" he shouted, was just another brick in the road to Dominion conquest. The dossier in the embassy chest is the only history book that will matter. It tells the story of a man who was broken, pointed at a target, and released. The Thalmor didn't need to conquer Skyrim with soldiers. They conquered it with a lie. They let Ulfric believe he was fighting for freedom when he was actually fighting for their supremacy. When you close that dossier, you aren't just closing a file on a rebel leader. You are closing the book on the tragedy of the Nords. You are witnessing the perfect crime of the Fourth Era. The Thalmor won the war the day they let Ulfric walk out of that interrogation room alive. And as the snow falls over a burning Windhelm in this dark future, the only sound left is the laughter of Elenwen, finally echoing through the halls of Ysgramor, unchallenged and absolute. The asset has served his purpose. The file is closed. Status liquidated. But that is a dark timeline, isn't it? A possible future, written in ink and paranoia, tucked away in a chest you might never even open. Tonight, the dragons are quiet. The civil war is just a distant rumour on the wind, a story told by guards around a campfire while they warm their hands. Let's step back from the edge of that cliff. Let's leave the politics of Solitude and the cold stones of Windhelm behind. Imagine you are back in a safe place. Maybe it's the warm, timbered interior of the Sleeping Giant Inn in Riverwood. Delphine isn't plotting, she's just wiping down the counter. Arngeir is stirring a pot of stew that smells of leeks and potatoes. The fire in the centre of the room is crackling, popping softly, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. You can hear the wind outside howling against the eaves, but it can't touch you here. You are warm. You're burdened by no heavy armour, no great destiny. The dossier is just paper. The war is just a game. The only thing that matters right now is the heavy feeling in your eyelids, the comfort of a soft bed, and the knowledge that in this moment, you are safe. Take a deep breath. Let the tension of the Thalmor, the Empire, and the Stormcloaks drain out of your shoulders. Let the map of Skyrim fade into a blur of white snow and grey mountains. The history is written, but your story is currently paused. The world will wait for you to wake up. For now, the fire is dying down to glowing embers. The music is fading to a gentle hum. The night is yours. Sweet dreams.